So moving on to the sixth passage, it reads as common intention and similar intention. Common intention does not mean similar intention of several persons. To constitute common intention, it is necessary that the intention of each one of them be known to the rest of them and shared by them. In the case of Dukhmochan Pandey vs. State of Bihar, the Supreme Court held that the common intention which developed at the spur of the moment is different from the similar intention actuated by a number of persons at the same time. The distinction between a common intention and similar intention may be fine, but it is nonetheless a real one, and if overlooked, it may lead to a miscarriage of justice. The mere presence of an accused together is not sufficient to hold that they share the common intention to commit the offence in question. It is necessary that the intention of each one of the several persons be known to each other for constituting common intention. So yeah, this is the passage. I think it's been so for example, A and B caught hold of C where only B stabbed C with a knife, but A is also liable for the murder as there was a pre-concerted action. In the case of Pandurang vs. State of Hyderabad, Supreme Court emphasized on this point that the prior concert need not be something always very much prior to the incident, but could well be something that may develop on the spot on the spur of the movement. I apologize, the order of the passage has gotten changed in this. So this slide is actually the last part of the passage, and these two slides are the first two part of the passage. So just read through the passage again at your own pace and keep this in mind, and then cull out the important points which you can find from the passage. So let's compare them to the ones which I have found now. So it says that the passage tells us that common intention implies a pre-arranged plan and acting together pursuant to the plan. It comes into being prior to the commission of the act. There is not a necessity for there to be a long gap between the two, that is the pre-arranged plan and the actual action. Next is pre-concert is not necessary to be proved. It can develop on the spot and can be inferred from facts. 5 is the example. 6, difference between there is a difference between common and similar intention. 7, for common intention it is necessary that intention of each party is known to all. 8, presence of accused together is not sufficient to show common intention. So now let's move on to the questions. A gang of 6 members went to a bank armed with weapons to commit a heist. While 5 of the gang members went inside the bank, Mr. A, the 6th member, waited outside the bank to alert them of any threat. During the heist, one of the gang members fired a gun at the branch manager. As a result, he died. All 5 escaped, but Mr. A was caught and arrested. Now choose the most appropriate option as per the principle stated in the above passage. Mr. A is not liable for the murder as he was outside the bank and there was no common intention. B. Mr. A, along with all members of the gang, are liable for murder as there was a common intention. C. Only that person is liable for murder who actually fired the gun. Or D. Mr. A is liable only for the heist and for no other offense. So just see the important points once. It says that what are the essentials of common intention? It says that there should be a plan of more than one person and they should act on that plan, and the plan of the person should be known to all of them. So in this case, 5 persons had made a plan to commit an armed robbery. So when they had made the plan, they knew of the risks associated with that. They knew that during an armed robbery, shots may be fired. So there was a common intention for all of this. So, and if there is common intention, all the persons whoever were part of the of the plan, for making the plan, will be equally liable for the offense. So keeping this in mind, attempt the answer. So I hope you have the correct option, because I've given you way too many hints, and the correct option is option B, because I told you that common intention, the requirements of common intention, and why in this case the requirements were satisfied. So that is why Mr. A along with all other members are liable for murder, as there was common intention. So now let's go to the next question. Raman and Raghav were riding on a motorcycle on a busy street. Suddenly, another biker, Aman, bumped into their bike. A heated argument started between the three of them. While Raghav started abusing Aman, Raman hit Aman with an iron rod lying on the road, and a consequence, he died. Now choose the correct option. A. Both Raman and Raghav are liable for murder, as there was a common intention developed on the spot. B. Raghav is not liable for murder, as there was no common intention. C. No one is liable, as Aman was a wrongdoer himself and he started the fight. D. Only Raghav is liable for murder, as he started abusing Aman. Again, just look at the essentials of common intention which we have pulled out in the important points, and the correct answer should be easy. So the correct option in this case is option B. Why? Because one of the essentials of common intention is that the intention of one person should be known to the other person. Now in this case, Raghav had no idea that Raman intended to kill Aman. That is why option B is the correct option. So let's go to the next question. After reading the passage, which of the following is not correct in relation to the difference between common and similar intention? A. Similar intention is developed prior to the commission of offense, but the common intention is developed only at the time of commission of the offense. B. Under common intention, each of the offender is equally liable for the offense, but under similar intention, each of the offender is differently liable. In order to determine the existence of similar or common intention, one must analyze the facts and circumstances of each case. D. The boundary between similar and common intention is very fine, and it may sometimes overlap. So here also this is a easy question. The just look at the important points which we have culled out, and the correct option is should be obvious to you. So the correct option is and I hope you have gotten it, is option A, right? Because just read the question again. It says, which of the following is not correct with relation to the difference between common and similar intention? So option A is saying similar intention is developed prior to the commission of the offense, but common intention is developed only at the time of commission of offense. Now this was nowhere said in the passage. In fact, the opposite was said in the passage. Like, it said that common intention may be developed at the time of commission of the offense, but there was never a bar on common intention being developed prior to the commission of the offense, right? Hence option A is the correct option. Next, Mr. X and Mr. Y entered into a house at night to commit theft. While committing theft, Mr. Y committed sexual assault on a minor girl of age 11. Identify for which of the following offences Mr. X is liable for. A. Both theft and sexual assault, as there was a common intention. B. Only theft, as there was a similar intention. C. Only theft, as Mr. X had a different intention from Y. Or D. He would not be liable for any offense. So again, just see the essentials of the two principles, and then just attempt the question. The correct option is option C, as point 8 which we have called out tells us that for common intention the intention of one party should be known to the other party. So in this case the common intention between the two was to commit theft, and there was no intention at all on part of Mr. X to commit sexual assault. So that is why there was a different intent on that aspect. So now let's move on to the next question. Which of the following statements is correct in relation to the difference between common intention and similar intention? Now this is you have to find the correct statement. A. The intention of the accused and co-accused can be inferred from the facts and circumstances from each case. B. Under common intention it is considered that all accused have jointly committed the offence themselves and are jointly liable. C. Each accused is liable for the offence he has actually committed if the common intention cannot be proved. Or option D, all of the above. Now see the important points again, attempt the question. And the correct option is option D, as all the three statements are given. The passage made it clear that the intention can be inferred from the facts and circumstances from each case. B. If common intention is proved, then the accused are jointly liable. And C. If if common intention is not proved, then each accused is liable for the offence he has actually committed. So thus all three are correct statements. So let's move on to the next passage now. And in case you have any doubts, or if you did not understand my explanation for any of the questions, or if you feel that another answer is the correct answer for any question, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. We'll be free to resolve any doubts. Article 21 of the Indian Constitution prohibits ex post facto laws. The expression ex post facto law means a law which imposes penalties or convictions on the acts already done and increases the penalty for such acts. In other words, ex post facto law imposes penalties retrospectively. For example, the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 came into force from 25/1961. A person guilty of accepting dowry is punishable under the Act after 25/1961 and not before 25/1961. Ex post facto laws are of three kinds. A law which declared some act or omission as an offence for the first time after the completion of that act or omission. B. A law which enhances the punishment or penalty for an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. C. A law which prescribes a new and different procedure for the prosecution of an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. Clause 1 of the Article 20 provides protection only in respect of the above first two categories, that is A and B, that is laws which declare acts as offences subsequent to the commission to those acts, and laws which enhance the penalty subsequently. Article 21 provides no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offence, nor be subjected to a penalty greater than that which might have been inflicted under the law in force at the time of the commission of the offence. The first part of clause 1 provides that no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of law in force at the time of commission of the act charged as an offence, and the second part of clause 1 protects a person from a penalty greater than that which he might be subjected to at the time of commission of the offence. So this is the passage. Just again follow that exercise, rewind the video, read through the passage at your own pace and cull out important points. then compare them to the ones which I have found out. So let's go to the important points which I have called out. 1. Ex post facto law means a law imposing penalty retrospectively. 2. Three types of ex post facto laws. A law which declared some act or an omission as an offence for first time after completion of the act or omission. B. A law which enhances the punishment or penalty for an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. C. A law which prescribes a new and different procedure for the prosecution of an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. 4. Only first two clauses are covered. 5. No person shall be convicted of an offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of commission of the offence. And 6. 21 protects a person from penalty greater than that which he might have been subjected to at the time of commission of the offence. So yeah, now let's move on to the questions. The Parliament of India legislated the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act in the year 2013, and simultaneously some new offences were also added to the Indian Penal Code. Mr. A is an employee of an institution against whom departmental inquiry has been initiated for committing sexual harassment of a female colleague in the year 2012. Now choose the correct option. A. Such inquiry is valid as per Article 21 as the complaint was made after the Act came into force. B. 21 will not be applicable as the matter does not relate to an offence. C. As the Act was passed in the year 2013, any inquiry under such Act is invalid. D. Only inquiry may be conducted but no penal action can be taken against him after such inquiry. So just look at the essentials of 21. What are the two types of acts it prohibits? What are the two types of ex post facto laws which are prohibited? And then look at the facts. That is also important. Look at the facts of the question. What is actually happening? So as per the facts, the inquiry is there is an inquiry going on since 2012. It was instituted in 2012. The new offences came in the Indian Penal Code in 2013. Now, which of the offences deals with which of the options is answering both of these factual scenarios? So the correct option should be clear to you now because of the hints. The correct option is option D, because it is the only one which is dealing with both the penal part, which is the ex post facto part, and the inquiry which is already going on before the new law came into force, right? So there is no Article 20 clause 1 of the Constitution is not barring any inquiry. It is saying that if a law is brought, you can't be punished retrospectively by that law. So inquiry can certainly be conducted, but under the Indian Penal Code, no penal action can be taken against him after such inquiry. Thus option D is the correct option. Next, Article 21 would not affect which of the following acts of the legislature? A. Act of the legislature enhancing the term of imprisonment. B. Act of the legislature enhancing the amount of fine. C. Act of the legislature changing the punishment of death to life imprisonment. D. Act of legislature changing the nature of imprisonment from simple to rigorous. So this is an extremely easy question. I'm sure you don't need any hints also for this. The correct option is option C, because that is the only one which is reducing the quantum of punishment. The other three are enhancing the quantum of punishment. Thus 21 would certainly affect those. But if you're reducing a quantum of punishment, Article 21 allows you the benefit of that law.
Hey guys, just a short break in the middle of the class to tell you to check out our website or follow the link in the description below to join our test series. We're going to be having sectional tests, full tests, a lot of practice material. Do check out our website. Cheers.
Next, Mr. A is a student of law aged 19 years. He is socially active, expresses opinion on every social and political event of the nation through social media platforms. In one of his blogs, he severely criticized the policy of a state government of changing names of cities and towns. He also stated that the government is biased towards a particular religion. This blog was posted on 19th April 2020, and subsequently an amendment was made to the Indian Penal Code whereby hate speech was made a distinct offence and punishment was prescribed. An action was brought against him under the said provision for that blog. Now choose the most appropriate option amongst the following. A. Mr. A may be liable for the offence of hate speech as the blog was not removed even after the amendment. B. Mr. A may be liable for the offence of hate speech as Article 20, Clause 1 does not cover such areas. C. Mr. A may not be liable for the offence because the act was done before the amendment. D. Mr. A may not be liable for the offence as his blog was innocent and of fair criticism. So the correct option in this case is just attempt the question. This is a little tricky question. The correct option is option A here, and this is because the facts say that it was a blog. Now that blog is a continuing thing, right? Even though the law came in subsequent to the initial publication, the fact of the matter is that the blog is continuing to stay online, and because of that, even from the date the new law came into force, the blog was still in existence. So the blog is still in existence. That hate speech is continuing. So in effect, the new law is not leading to a retrospective action. For this reason, A is the correct option. So the next question, considering the fact situation given in the above question, that is the blog 1, the parliament passes a legislation in September 2020 whereby an amendment is made to the Juvenile Act, and now a person below the age of 20 would be a juvenile and special procedure would be followed for his trial. Choose the most appropriate option. A. Mr. A would not be considered as a juvenile as it is prohibited under the scheme of Article 20 subclause 1. B. Mr. A would not be considered as juvenile because the amendment came after he committed the offence. C. Mr. A would be considered a juvenile and tried under the new procedure. D. None of the above. So here again, just look at the two types of laws which are not permitted by Article 20 clause 1, and the correct option is should be obvious. The correct option is option C, because the legislation is merely changing a procedure, and retrospective change in the procedure is not affecting you negatively, hence it is permitted. Considering the fact situation in the third question, Parliament passes a legislation for probation of offenders, under which any offender below the age of 21 will not serve the sentence of imprisonment in a prison. Instead, he will serve the sentence in a probation house. Now choose the most appropriate option. Mr. A will get the benefit of the Probation of Offenders Act. B. Mr. A will not get the benefit of Probation of Offenders Act. C. It is discretion of Mr. A to decide whether he wants benefit or not. D. None of the above. Again, just look at the important points, and the correct option is clear. Since it is a benefit being given, the penalty is not being enhanced, penalty is being reduced. Thus, do you think ex post facto law, the bar will apply? No, it won't, right? So option A is the correct option. So the last passage of the CLAT 2020 paper, the bench of Dr. Dhananjay Yashwant Chandrachud and M.R. Shah has refused to transfer to CBI the criminal cases lodged against Republic TV editor-in-chief Arnab Goswami for alleged defamatory news show telecast on April 21st in connection with the Palghar mob lynching case. It also quashed all FIRs against Arnab Goswami except one which was filed in Nagpur and which has been transferred to Mumbai via order dated 24/4/2020. Delivering the verdict, Justice Chandrachud said, Article 32 of the Constitution constitutes recognition of the constitutional duty entrusted to this court to protect the fundamental rights of citizens. The exercise of journalistic freedom lies at the core of speech and expression protected by Article 19(1)(a). The petitioner is a media journalist. The airing of views on television shows which he hosts is in exercise of his fundamental right to speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a). India's freedoms will rest safe as long as journalists can speak truth to power without being chilled by a threat of reprisal. Free citizens cannot exist when the news media is changed to adhere to one position. Yuval Noah Harari has put it succinctly in his recent book titled 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He says that questions you cannot answer are usually far better for you than answers you cannot question. So just read through the passage again and pull out the important points which you could find in the passage. Again, this is different from the normal types of passages, the majority of the passage which we have seen, because it's not elaborating on specific legal principles except like freedom of speech and expression. So yeah, just pull out the important points, anyone which you can find. Let's compare them to the ones which I have found. One is SC rejected the prayer to transfer case to CBI. They quashed all FIRs except one. Article 32 gives SC the power to protect fundamental rights of citizens. 4. Journalistic freedom is core of fundamental rights under Article 19(1)(a). And 5th, Arnab's airing of his views on TV is part of his fundamental rights. So let's go to the first question. The above passage mentions about the journalist's request to transfer the case to CBI for investigation. What would be the appropriate reason for such a request? A. The CBI is a central investigation agency and conducts more specific investigations. B. Where state government is an interested party, the investigation conducted by the state may be biased. C. The FIRs relate to an offence of defamation of the president of a national party, so the matter should be investigated by the CBI. Or D. None of the above. Also, in like the questions on this passage, it was a little different from the other passages, because here the questions were not directly based on the passage. Like they were, like if you see the question here, it is the fact of why it was given to the CBI or something is not something which is discussed in the passage, and even the principles related to that are not given in the passage. So here this is more on like this question though is more on your general awareness, or yeah, this question I think was misplaced in the legal reasoning section, but since it's there I'll solve it. But as you yourself can see, it is very different from the other types of passages which the first 7 types of passages and the questions we got from that passage. So in this, the correct option is option B, because where the state that is the most correct option. Like CBI does not conduct a more scientific investigation, but because the state government is an interested party, investigation by the state police may surely be biased. Hence option B is the correct option. Next, the above passage quotes the observation of the court in relation to freedom of speech and expression as questions you cannot answer are better than questions you cannot question. Now based on such are better than answers you cannot question. Now based on such observation, choose the most appropriate option which describes the scope of such questions. The questions are not subject to limitations imposed by freedom of speech and expression. B. These questions are limited to the information warranted by the person. C. Quote is referring to the right of information through the above quote. D. The questions are also subject to limitations imposed by the freedom of speech and expression. So again, like, I can't tell you to look at the important points which we've pulled out because they don't answer this question. But like, this is more on your general awareness. So if you have seen the last lecture which was on the constitutional law, we saw Article 19. I explained Article 19 in that lecture, and what we saw there was that the freedoms which are given, that is freedom of speech and expression, is subject to reasonable restriction. So you have a right to question the government, but that is also subject to the reasonable restrictions given under the same article. Hence option D is the correct option, since every freedom of speech and expression is limited by the reasonable restrictions allowed under the Article 19. Next, it is an established principle of law that the offence of defamation has many exceptions, and the imputation of truth is one of them. But the accused must prove that such imputation was true and also for the public good. In light of this statement, which of the following statements are not defamatory? An article published in a newspaper about the unaccounted property of a public servant in the form of a questionnaire. B. Question to a female actress about her sexual relationship with a married man. C. A question to a public servant about his extramarital relationship with a colleague. D. An article published in a magazine stating a female politician as B-grade actress. Here you have to call out the important points from the question. Like, this is a weird question and a weird question based on the passage, because they are not actually based on the passage. Like, the passage is just there. All the questions are very different from the passage. So I think this is a misnomer for the CLAT question paper, and it's a poorly framed passage and questions, in my opinion. But still, this is a easy question if you look at the questions and the principles in the question, then the answer is clear. So the correct option is option A, because the one of the requirements was that the statement should be in public good, right? So only one of these can be said to be in public good. The revelations with respect to sexual relationship, or female politicians as B-grade actress, etc., none of those are in public good. But unaccounted property is something for which you can hold a public servant accountable. That is why only option A is the correct option. Next, in the above passage, the court ordered for the merging of different FIRs into one and the investigation to be conducted at Mumbai. What is the reason behind such an order? A. Multiple FIRs mean multiple investigations, and the same might cause hardship to the accused. B. The first FIR was registered at Mumbai and the investigation should be conducted at Mumbai. C. The accused resides at Mumbai and the investigation should be conducted only at Mumbai. D. Multiple FIRs are frivolous and there is only one cause of action. Like, again, this is a weird question because the reasoning behind why the FIRs was quashed were not mentioned in the passage. So like, this is also a misnomer only in that sense. But still, like, now you have to search for the most logical answer out of these. And like, if you saw the passage there, the reasoning, some of the reasoning which was culled out, the court was trying to balance the rights of the accused, right? So because of the rights of the accused, they quashed all the FIRs except one. So here also only one is dealing with the rights of the accused. Only one option is dealing with the rights of the accused, and that is also option A, because option A is telling us that multiple FIRs mean multiple investigations, and the same might cause hardship to the accused. So that is why only one FIR is allowed. Next, defamation is punishable both as civil wrong as well as a crime. B, only as civil wrong. C, only as criminal wrong. D, none of the above. Again, this is a question on legal awareness. This should have no place in the legal reasoning section of CLAT. But so like this is not mentioned in the passage. This defeats the entire point of a passage based question paper. But this is also something which you can expect from the CLAT committee. They will always have some questions which should not be there, unfortunately, but they have a history of messing up every year, and you should also be prepared for some mess ups here when you give CLAT next year. So here like I can't expect you to find it from the important points. I might as well tell you, in Indian law, defamation is punishable both as a civil wrong as well as a crime. Thus option A is the correct option. And with that, we have come to an end of the legal reasoning section of CLAT. If you have any doubts, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And this is the end of our legal reasoning series as a whole. And if you've liked this lecture series, kindly subscribe and subscribe to the channel, as we'll be coming out with a lot more content with regards to the other sections of CLAT as well, and I'm sure they'll be helpful and it will help us increase our reach. So yeah, thank you and best of luck.